At approximately 2 minutes prior to 10 a.m., Jordan cuts off Crockett's preliminary remarks, initiating their characteristic dynamic by labeling her a frustrated Democrat promoting unsubstantiated claims. Byron Donalds contributes his perspective, implying she merely appreciates hearing herself speak, following a recognized pattern aimed at derision and marginalizing a woman of color. While they have utilized this approach on numerous past occasions, this particular instance is distinctly different owing to the fact she holds verifiable evidence. Audiences ought to closely observe this proceeding, as the occurrences transpiring during the subsequent 40 minutes will likely serve as future instructional material in legal and political science studies. This serves as the narrative describing how a singularly prepared individual, armed with 2 notebooks, compromised the reputations of 2 influential men who considered themselves untouchable. The hearing room of the House Oversight Committee is densely packed with media and Republican members prepared to criticize the Department of Justice regarding its actions against Trump. As Democrats organize to protect institutional standards, the expected routine partisan performances will probably result merely in segments suitable for Fox News broadcasting. Jasmine Crockett is seated with 2 distinct folders positioned adjacent to her placard, one colored red and the opposing one blue. 21 days of rigorous preparation have been distilled into records that are poised to severely damage 2 professional trajectories. Despite the fact that only she and her aides are currently aware of this development, Jim Jordan enters the hearing notwithstanding his lack of membership on the Oversight Committee, waiting in the visitor section in his typical vest-only appearance for his opportunity to dominate the floor. Simultaneously, Byron Donalds assumes his place on the panel, already grinning with folded arms as both individuals prepare to engage in their usual pattern of interrupting, dismissing, and mocking any Democratic woman aiming to present meaningful arguments. Crockett commences her preliminary address at 9:58 concerning the requirement for authentic Department of Justice supervision. She is roughly 90 seconds into her deliberate and professional remarks when Jordan's voice fills the chamber, stating, "Here we find another scenario with the frustrated Democrat and her unfounded theories." He implies that it would be advantageous if she dedicated less time to exhibiting emotion and concentrated further on obtaining concrete facts. Byron Donalds chuckles audibly and contributes that she simply enjoys hearing herself talk, performing for the media as per usual, before recommending that the responsible adults be allowed to debate real concerns. A number of Republican colleagues laugh as this conduct represents standard procedure for them, trivializing Democratic women, specifically women of color, who refuse to exhibit the expected subservience toward influential white men. Chairman Comer makes a lackluster effort to restore decorum, yet he is obviously tolerant of the dynamic, as this precisely mirrors the partisan spectacle he intended. None among them realize that Crockett has anticipated this precise instant for 21 days, readying herself for this specific form of confrontation and wishing they would be unwise enough to grant her the reason to shift focus from DOJ supervision to something considerably more damaging. She halts abruptly during her remarks and grins. That distinct smile, characteristic of a prosecutor, which signals that a disastrous strategic mistake has occurred. She sets her drafted opening remarks face down with intentional conclusiveness. Upon looking up, her vocal tone has altered, now exhibiting a sharpness with undertones they ought to identify as perilous but are unable to discern. She expresses gratitude to Mr. Jordan and Mr. Donalds for that introduction, observing that it assists her comprehension of the nature of this proceeding. She hesitates to permit them that momentary feeling of gratification that antagonists experience when they assume victory. She mentions that she had drafted meaningful comments regarding ethics at the Department of Justice. However, given that they both chose to personalize the matter, criticizing her integrity and deriding her for the boldness to speak, she intends to switch subjects completely. She uncovers both the red and blue binders, arranging materials with an orderly accuracy that indicates weeks of detailed readying. She announces that they will instead discuss their personal ethics, emphasizing their own responsibility in controversies that rarely seem to be examined despite possessing greater relevance to matters of integrity than anything concerning the Justice Department. She glances toward Jordan, then toward Donalds, stating that contrary to their approach, she values preparation, written evidence, and maintaining records. Donalds tries to interject, yet she stops him by subtly elevating her hand and employing a commanding prosecutorial tone that compels his silence. She tells Mr. Donalds that currently it is her recognized time, and she purposed to utilize every moment to address matters neither of them desired to discuss, which is precisely why they attempted to silence her. She directs her attention to Chairman Comer and declares she is taking back her allotted time, adding that she would value it if he advised Mr. Jordan, who is not even a sitting member of this panel, that acknowledged speakers ought to be permitted to conclude without facing criticism from the spectator area. The chamber falls silent as Republican members perceive a change in dynamic and recognize this is not proceeding according to their plan. Crockett persists with composed assurance, stating she possesses legal filings, sworn testimony, voting histories, financial statements, and investigative conclusions, all carefully recorded and confirmed. She informs them that when they chose to confront her this morning, they committed the most significant strategic blunder of their professional lives because she holds evidence on both individuals that will render this ethics proceeding highly compelling for all observers. She selects a page from the red notebook and addresses Mr. Jordan, suggesting they examine his tenure as an assistant wrestling coach at Ohio State University between 1987 and 1995. She states they must address Dr. Richard Strauss regarding what Jordan understood, the timing of that understanding, and his subsequent actions, which appear, based on voluminous records, to be absolutely non-existent. Jordan's countenance alters swiftly, with color vanishing and then rushing back. As all individuals familiar with the Ohio State controversy immediately grasp the situation, they comprehend that Crockett is about to compel Jim Jordan to answer for his alleged part in minimizing the sexual misconduct involving 177 young males. This is something he has circumvented for decades until this exact moment when he committed the critical mistake of deriding a prepared woman holding proof. The instant Jasmine Crockett brings up Richard Strauss and Ohio State University, the entire environment within the hearing room transforms with an almost palpable intensity. Republican members who were sitting casually 30 seconds ago are suddenly erect and reaching for their mobile devices. Democratic aides in the rear commence typing vigorously because they understand this is poised to become significant news. Jim Jordan's expression transitions through a striking sequence of hues as he grasps the unfolding events and understands, with the lucidity of a sudden catastrophe, that he has entered directly into a predicament he cannot easily avoid. Crockett asserts that Dr. Richard Strauss served as the medical professional for the wrestling team at Ohio State University during Jordan's tenure as assistant coach, her delivery adopting that specific prosecutorial rhythm trial attorneys employ when approaching a devastating revelation. Every declaration establishes the foundation for subsequent remarks, as she observes that Strauss was also, according to an impartial review carried out by the Perkins Coie firm and published by Ohio State University, a sexual predator who victimized a minimum of 177 male students spanning an 18-year time frame from 1979 to 1997. She retrieves a record from the red binder and holds it so the media can observe the formal Ohio State University insignia, stating that the institution has expended over $60 million in financial resolutions to victims. She underscores to Mr. Jordan that this amount is $60 million resulting from misconduct that occurred while he was coaching, misconduct that voluminous witnesses assert they reported specifically to him, and misconduct about which he took no action. Jim Jordan attempts to interject from his position in the spectator area, asserting that this lacks relevance to the proceeding and is clearly politically motivated. However, Crockett silences him with methodical accuracy, maintaining that it is entirely relevant to a hearing concerning ethics and responsibility, which is ostensibly what they are examining today. Given that he chose to question her ethics and trustworthiness during her initial remarks, she considers it altogether fitting that they examine his. She retrieves another record, identifying it as sworn statements from Mike DiSabato, a wrestler who trained under his guidance from 1987 to 1991. She announces she purposes to read his testimony presented under oath in a lawsuit against Ohio State University, which asserts Jim Jordan definitely understood these events were occurring. The testimony recounts an injury where the athlete entered Strauss's examination room and the doctor commenced pulling down his athletic gear, prompting the wrestler to inquire about his actions before departing and informing Jimmy Jordan of the occurrence, to which Jordan merely chuckled. The chamber is completely hushed now, save for the sound of Crockett's voice reciting testimony, the clicking of media cameras, and the rustling of papers as journalists scramble to record details. Whatever expectations individuals held regarding this event, it certainly did not involve a Democratic Congresswoman methodically dismantling Jim Jordan's standing with records he cannot refute or simplify. Crockett persists by retrieving a subsequent document from Dunyasha Yetz, a wrestler at Ohio State between 1993 and 1997. He recalls sustaining a thumb injury and entering Strauss's office where the medical practitioner commenced lowering his wrestling trunks, causing him to inquire about the doctor's actions before he departed and informed Jimmy Jordan of the event, only for Jordan to merely chuckle. She glances up from the record and informs Mr. Jordan that this constitutes two distinct wrestlers, two separate individuals, both recounting the identical pattern where they notified him regarding inappropriate sexual conduct from the team physician, and he took no action besides chuckling. She is merely beginning, and everyone present can sense that she is constructing a systematic and devastating argument. It becomes evident this is not a haphazard critique, but a meticulously organized prosecution established on records that cannot be dismissed as partisan, fantastical theories because they originate from impartial reviews, sworn statements, and university financial resolutions. Adam DiSabato, a subsequent wrestler, stated under oath that Jordan contacted him emotionally and imploringly after his brother publicly accused Jordan of knowledge regarding the misconduct. Crockett quotes the record, stating, Jim Jordan contacted him emotionally, imploringly begging him to contradict his brother and begging him not to support his brother's description. She informs Mr. Jordan that constitutes witness intimidation and demonstrates him attempting to coerce someone into not revealing the truth concerning his knowledge. Jim Jordan's legal representatives, because naturally he possesses attorneys now and has sought advice from costly legal advisors regarding how to address inquiries about Ohio State, have undoubtedly advised him never to respond directly concerning his knowledge or timing, cautioning him that any statement he makes can be employed in future litigation. However, remaining quiet while Crockett recites testimony after testimony produces its own form of damaging visuals, making him appear culpable even if it represents the legally astute maneuver. Crockett inquiries of Mr. Jordan directly, constructing the question with years of background making influential individuals uneasy in legal settings, whether athletes under his oversight notified him about Dr. Strauss participating in inappropriate sexual conduct, insisting on a yes or no response. The hush extends for 5 seconds, then 10 seconds, then 15 seconds, and Jim Jordan's expression cycles through every conceivable shade of red while he attempts to determine how to react in a manner that will not generate further legal accountability, while simultaneously not appearing as though he is declining to answer a straightforward inquiry regarding concealing sexual misconduct. Ultimately, he adopts the worst option among them, presenting a non-answer that renders him evasive without actually providing legal protection. He finally declares that the assertions referenced have been comprehensively reviewed, and he has consistently stated he never witnessed any misconduct, spoken even to non-lawyers. It is patently obvious he is circumventing the actual inquiry, employing phrases his lawyers drafted for him and attempting to navigate carefully between disavowing knowledge and avoiding perjury. Crockett replies instantaneously, allowing him no room to adjust or change focus, clarifying that she did not inquire if he witnessed misconduct, but rather if athletes notified him of it. 8 distinct wrestlers, 8 separate individuals have stated under oath that they notified him specifically regarding Dr. Strauss's inappropriate sexual behavior. An impartial review determined that the misconduct was so prevalent and so glaring that numerous individuals in the sports department understood or ought to have understood, including members of the coaching staff. Ohio State University has expended over $60 million to resolve litigation from victims, yet he asserts he never understood anything. She permits that contradiction to linger for a moment, allowing the implausibility of his disavowal to hang in the air like smoke so all observers comprehend that either 8 different individuals are committing perjury for no visible reason, or Jim Jordan is lying right now to circumvent accountability. She requests that the official records indicate Mr. Jordan declined to deliver a straightforward response to whether athletes reported misconduct to him. Notwithstanding Jordan's attempt to object that he did respond, everyone present comprehends that what he offered was not a response but meticulously phrased legal terminology intended to create plausible deniability. Crockett recaps what is understood from impartial review and sworn statements. 177 victims, $60 million in resolutions, 8 witnesses who notified him specifically concerning misconduct, and 18 years of Dr. Strauss victimizing young males while Jordan was in a position of authority and took no action to halt it. The aspect of hypocrisy follows next, and Crockett delivers it with the type of accuracy that demonstrates she has reflected on every segment of this confrontation, anticipated every reply, and readying herself for every attempt to shift focus or trivialize. She observes that he now desires to head the Judiciary Panel and examine the Department of Justice regarding ethical infractions. There is a quality in her vocal delivery that is not precisely anger but something frigid, resembling contempt developed over years of observing influential men face no ramifications for concealing misconduct. She disputes his aspiration to discuss responsibility when he has never faced accountability for the most severe ethical violation conceivable, which involves shielding a sexual predator who victimized student athletes under his oversight. She interrogates his standing to instruct others concerning integrity, while he has never clarified to those 177 victims why he took no action when athletes notified him regarding the unfolding events. She retrieves another record demonstrating Jim Jordan's legislative history, or more precisely his utter lack of legislative accomplishment, notwithstanding 17 years in Congress. While reviewing his history, she suggests they discuss what he has actually achieved as a member of Congress, apart from striking poses for Fox News segments and interrupting Democratic women during proceedings. Now there is a sharpness to her delivery indicating she is appreciating this chance to expose precisely how little Jordan has accomplished beyond theatrical performance. She observes he has served in the House of Representatives since 2007, totaling 17 years, and she accessed his legislative history through the Library of Congress. She inquires of him directly regarding how many legislative proposals he has successfully advanced into law as the lead sponsor. Jordan understands the direction of this point and knows the response will render him in a negative light, so he attempts to shift focus with talk about battling for conservative ideals and resisting government overreach. However, Crockett does not permit him that easy escape, stating the figure is 0, allowing the number to linger there resembling an accusation. It is 0 pieces of legislation enacted into law with his name as lead sponsor, notwithstanding 17 years in Congress, notwithstanding heading the Judiciary Panel, and notwithstanding all his talk regarding being a combatant for conservative principles. She informs Mr. Jordan he does not create legislation, govern, enact laws, or resolve issues, nor does he perform any of the tasks members of Congress are actually selected to carry out. Instead, he strikes poses, interrupts, generates Fox News segments, critiques witnesses, and makes assertions based on unsubstantiated theories, achieving nothing apart from obstruction and theatricality. The perspective concerning January 6th appears last in this section, with Crockett constructing methodically from the Ohio State concealment to the legislative shortcoming to the ultimate hypocrisy of someone who resisted congressional oversight, now insisting everyone else yield to it. She notes he also exchanged communications with President Trump on January 6th during the incursion at the Capitol, retrieving records demonstrating telephonic history and testimony from the January 6th panel. He assisted in planning the approach to challenge electoral tallies, advocated election misrepresentations without evidence, and was actively involved in the endeavor to reverse the 2020 election results. When the January 6th panel legally summoned him to testify regarding those communications and that planning, she does not wait for him to reply because they both understand his actions. Everyone observing understands his actions as it constituted news currently and is a documented occurrence now. he declined to cooperate. He resisted a congressional legal summons from a properly authorized investigative panel, yet this identical Jim Jordan now intimidates with contempt charges against any individual who does not instantaneously comply with his demands for testimony. The identical Jim Jordan who instructs witnesses regarding their obligation to cooperate with congressional supervision declined himself to answer inquiries concerning his part in attempting to reverse a Democratic election. She collects the records from the red binder, stacks them tidily, and positions them back before her with a motion that feels like concluding a case file subsequent to a successful prosecution. She gazes directly at him seated in the spectator area with his expression flushed, jaw clenched, and hands grasping the seat ahead of him, stating, "Here is what she desires to understand." She interrogates how he can head a panel investigating any individual when he himself declined to cooperate with a legitimate congressional inquiry. She interrogates how he can instruct concerning ethics when he prioritized concealing the sexual misconduct involving 177 young males, and how he can insist on responsibility when he has never faced accountability for any of his actions. She interrogates how he can sit in that place and deride her for attempting to hold a meaningful conversation concerning justice when his entire professional history is established on circumventing justice for himself. Jim Jordan possesses no reply and merely sits there appearing like he desires to interrupt, but understanding that any statement he makes will merely provide her further material. He understands the segment of him being unable to reply is poised to be viewed millions of times, and recognizes he committed a disastrous error when he chose to deride Jasmine Crockett this morning. The transition from compromising Jim Jordan to neutralizing Byron Donalds requires roughly 5 seconds, precisely enough time frame for Crockett to shut the red binder and uncover the blue one. It constitutes precisely enough time frame for Donalds to grasp that what just occurred to Jordan is poised to occur to him, and there is nothing he can carry out to halt it because she possesses documentation, readying, and prosecutorial momentum from delivering blow subsequent to blow without facing deflection. Crockett addresses Mr. Donalds with her delivery adopting a different quality, less concerning institutional betrayal like with Jordan and further concerning personal hypocrisy, given that he found Mr. Jordan's derision so entertaining, chuckled, and contributed his own trivializing remarks concerning how she appreciates the sound of her own vocal delivery. She recommends they examine his history and competence on law, order, ethics, and responsibility. Byron Donalds attempts to silence her, asserting this is improper, but Crockett overwhelms him completely with the assurance of someone who understands she possesses facts on her side while he possesses nothing but bluster. She asserts that in the year 2000, Mr. Donalds was detained as part of a bank misrepresentation scheme in which he and fellow participants utilized untruthful details to deceptively acquire funds from a financial entity. The words strike like explosives because this is not conjecture or political critique. It constitutes a documented criminal history that represents a matter of public record, yet somehow never faces examination in Republican talking points concerning law and order. She notes the initial accusation was felony bank misrepresentation, and while he accepted a negotiated resolution to a lesser accusation, the details of his actions are unambiguous. He participated in a conspiracy to deceptively deprive a bank of over $13,000. She retrieves the court records and displays them so media devices can record the formal emblems and case identifiers demonstrating that this constitutes not invention or hyperbole, but actual documented criminal justice system records from Donald's own past. She informs Mr. Donalds these constitute the legal records, the arrest history from the Fort Myers Police Department, the charging record from the state attorney's office, and the resolution agreement demonstrating what he conceded to in order to circumvent proceeding to trial on the felony misrepresentation accusation. She distributes them across the surface before her and interrogates him directly regarding whether he participated in a scheme to deceptively deprive a financial entity, insisting on a yes or no response. Donalds attempts the identical strategy Jordan employed, attempting to shift focus, trivialize, and justify by stating it occurred over 20 years ago during his youth, and he has conceded making errors in his history. But Crockett slices through that like a heated implement through dairy product, stating she did not inquire how lengthy ago it occurred or whether he was youthful but inquired simply if he participated in bank misrepresentation, yes or no. She waits, permitting the hush to extend, compelling him to either concede it directly or decline to answer a direct inquiry concerning his own criminal history. Donalds ultimately concedes yes. He accepted a negotiated resolution to a lesser accusation over 20 years ago, attempting to contribute details and mitigation. However, Crockett has already progressed because obtaining the concession constituted the objective, as compelling him to say yes under oath represented what she required. She expresses gratitude for that directness, though there is nothing appreciative in her delivery. It constitutes pure prosecutorial gratification at compelling a defendant to concede to details they would prefer to conceal. She clarifies that she is not there to contradict that individuals can alter or that historical errors ought to haunt someone perpetually. As a criminal defense practitioner, she has dedicated years representing individuals who made errors and earned second possibilities and opportunities for absolution. So she comprehends rehabilitation and development. The qualification is approaching, and everyone can sense it. Understanding she is establishing the distinction between supporting redemption generally and highlighting specific hypocrisy. She informs Mr. Donalds the predicament is that he demonstrates no modesty concerning his history while judging others. He instructs invariably concerning law and order while being literally a convicted financial offender. He critiqued the Department of Justice for prosecuting fraud and corruption while he himself participated in deceiving a bank. She retrieved his voting history, another collection of records from the Blue Binder, observing that he votes against resources for law enforcement, against prosecuting domestic terrorism, and against protecting voting rights. Yet he cloaks himself in law and order terminology while objecting to every actual law enforcement priority that does not involve repressing demonstrations or focusing on immigrants. The inventory of hypocrisy persists, and Crockett delivers each instance with the systematic comprehensiveness of someone who has conducted her investigation and understands precisely how to construct a case incrementally until the structure becomes irrefutable. She highlights he voted against the Violence Against Women Act, legislation that delivers resources for examining and prosecuting domestic abuse and sexual assault. He voted against protecting women from mistreatment but asserts support for law enforcement. She accesses his voting history on her electronic tablet and displays the actual vote for the media devices, observing he voted against supplementary resources for police departments across the nation, against federal allocations for recruiting further officers, acquiring gear, and improving training. But somehow he asserts to be pro-law enforcement. He voted against the January 6th panel to examine the incursion at the Capitol, against holding individuals responsible for assaulting police officers and attempting to reverse an election, and voted to shield the individuals who sent police officers to the medical facility with injuries. Yet he asserts to support the police. Each voting history instance strikes resembling evidence being introduced in a proceeding, eroding Donalds's carefully developed persona as someone concerned regarding law and order and justice. Each instance demonstrates that what he actually supports is authoritarian enforcement against the preferred focuses rather than the actual rule of law. The comments regarding Jim Crow follow next, and this represents where Crockett's vocal delivery adopts a different quality, something firmer and further personal. Because this constitutes not merely concerning hypocrisy anymore. This constitutes a person of color betraying his own community and his own history for political gain. She highlights his declarations about Black Americans being better off during Jim Crow segregation, permitting the words to linger in the air like an accusation, impossible to shift focus or trivialize. She observes he actually stated on voluminous occasions that Black families possessed greater unity, further stability, and were better off in various manners during the time frame of American history when Black people could not vote, attend white educational institutions, or consume from the same water facilities, and faced systematic oppression, terrorization, and denial of basic human dignity. She inclines forward and her delivery becomes soft in a manner that compels everyone to struggle to listen, stating that her grandparents endured Jim Crow. They brought up their children in Louisiana during segregation and had to steer through a system that regarded them as less than human. They faced denial of opportunities, exposure to violence, and compulsion to accept degradation just to survive. Her delivery becomes even softer as she addresses him as a person of color who holds a place in Congress owing to the civil rights movement that battled, bled, and died to terminate Jim Crow. She informs Mr. Donalds that asserting circumstances were preferable back then constitutes not merely offensive or historically uninformed, it constitutes a betrayal of every individual who endured under segregation. It constitutes a betrayal of every civil rights figure who battled for his right to hold that position, and a betrayal of his own community for political points with a Republican base that appreciates it when black conservatives assert that oppression was not so severe. She retrieves video on her electronic tablet and exhibits a segment of Donalds presenting these comments, ensuring every individual can hear him state in his own words that black families possessed preferable structure during Jim Crow. It renders it impossible for him to assert he was misquoted or removed from proper context. She interrogates Mr. Donalds regarding whether he maintains these comments and if he still holds that black Americans were better off during formalized segregation and systemic oppression, insisting on a yes or no response. Byron Donalds attempts to retract it, asserting he was establishing a subtle point concerning family structure that faced misunderstanding and attempting to reframe his comments as concerning something other than what they patently represented. But Crockett does not permit him to evade that easily, reminding him he stated this on voluminous occasions, intensified his position when critiqued, and upheld these comments rather than expressing regret for them. Consequently, this constituted not an unintentional error or a misstatement. It represented a deliberate political stance that black people were somehow better off when they faced systematic oppression. She secures the electronic tablet and declares, "The sole inquiry is whether he still maintains it." The hush that follows is incriminatory, as Donalds is incapable of saying yes because that would constitute political downfall, but incapable of saying no because that would signify conceding he was erroneous. Nothing in his character permits that form of modesty, so he merely sits there confined between his own words and his current political requirements, while media devices record every moment of his unease. The concluding section on Donalds concentrates on his voting history in a manner that demonstrates the pattern of theatricality over substance, of adopting positions that resonate well in Republican talking points but actively damage his own constituents. Crockett states he voted against catastrophe assistance for Florida subsequent to Hurricane Ian, voting against federal crisis resources for his own state, his own region, and his own constituents whose residences faced destruction and whose lives were disrupted, while retrieving the vote history. Subsequently, when the Biden administration provided those resources regardless and FEMA entered to assist in rebuilding and recovering despite his vote opposing it, he appeared at community gatherings accepting credit for the assistance. He voted against the infrastructure legislation, against resources for roads, speed internet, and water systems that Florida critically requires, and subsequently attended ceremonial openings for infrastructure developments in his region, appreciating resources he opposed. He voted against capping insulin at $35 for individuals with diabetes and against legislation that would have rendered life-preserving medication attainable for his constituents, and subsequently returned home and informed voters he concerns himself regarding health care expenses. Each instance establishes on the preceding one, generating a pattern of someone who votes against his own constituents' interests and subsequently attempts to accept credit when Democratic policies assist them regardless. It demonstrates someone further interested in partisan positioning than authentic governance. Crockett collects the records from the blue binder with the identical conclusiveness she demonstrated closing the red binder on Jim Jordan, stating she possesses an inquiry for Mr. Donalds. She reminds him that he chuckled when Mr. Jordan derided her, stated she appreciates the sound of her own vocal delivery, and trivialized her endeavor to hold a meaningful conversation concerning justice and responsibility as theatricality. She maintains that she utilizes her voice to speak veracity, insist on responsibility from individuals who consider themselves superior, and speak for people who lack influence. She interrogates what he utilizes his voice for, implying it is to defend a president facing criminal charges, critique law enforcement when they examine offenses committed by his political partners, instruct concerning ethics while concealing his own conviction, assert black people were better off under segregation, and vote against his own constituents while accepting credit for policies he resisted. He derided her for performing, yet his entire professional history is theatricality, performing faithfulness to Trump, performing indignation for Fox News, performing law and order while objecting to actual justice, and performing concern for constituents while voting against their requirements. She states at least she is performing integrity and responsibility, and inquires what exactly Byron is performing. He possesses no response, merely sits there with his countenance flushed and jaw clenched, while his carefully developed persona of being a serious law and order conservative disintegrates in actual time frame as segments of his conviction, Jim Crow comments, and voting history broadcast on screens across the nation. With both Jordan and Donalds comprehensively discredited, Crockett shifts to the broader point she has been developing toward: the systematic issue that permitted both of these individuals to advance to positions of influence despite controversies that would have terminated alternative professional paths. It constitutes the mechanism of Republican politics that shields its own while critiquing Democrats for significantly less. Addressing the panel leader, her delivery implies she is developing toward a finale, blending everything she has presented into a logical argument regarding why this matters beyond merely two hypocrites facing exposure. She observes this proceeding was convened to examine ethics and responsibility at the Department of Justice. Republicans assert that prosecuting Donald Trump signifies weaponization of federal law enforcement, and that holding influential individuals responsible for offenses is somehow political persecution. She recommends examining that assertion utilizing the two individuals who confronted her this morning as detailed analyses in what responsibility actually looks like versus what usually faces provision. She structures her thoughts visibly, collecting records from both notebooks and generating a consolidated presentation out of what had represented two separate prosecutions. Donald Trump is confronting 91 criminal accusations spanning 4 jurisdictions. These constitute not political accusations devised by partisans, but criminal accusations initiated by grand juries subsequent to reviewing proof, hearing sworn statements, and adhering to the identical legal procedures that pertain to any American accused of serious offenses. She retrieves the mishandled sensitive documents case as her instance, observing that the foundational details face no dispute. Trump retrieved sensitive materials involving nuclear information to his coastal facility in Mar-a-Lago, contained them in a lavatory and a social hall, declined to return them notwithstanding legal demands, displayed them to individuals lacking sensitive information permissions, and instructed his attorney to mislead the FBI regarding his remaining possessions. She informs Mr. Chairman, these constitute serious federal offenses and infractions of statutes that exist for legitimate national security justifications. If any alternative American herself or any individual in that chamber retrieved sensitive nuclear records home and declined to return them, they would reside in federal facility right now serving 20-year sentences for espionage, not seeking presidency and convening rallies. The distinction she is developing is methodical and devastating, demonstrating that what Republicans term weaponization constitutes actually just equal enforcement of the law, while what they defend involves influential individuals evading ramifications for offenses owing to their positions and associations. When the Department of Justice adheres to the proof and initiates accusations against Trump for offenses he patently perpetrated, Republicans term it weaponization, political persecution, and the neutralization of democracy. As if holding influential individuals responsible for violating statutes is somehow further perilous than permitting them to violate statutes with no ramifications. She motions toward Jim Jordan's position and where Byron Donalds sits on the panel. Meanwhile, Mr. Jordan shielded concerning the sexual misconduct involving 177 young males and encountered 0 ramifications, no accusations, no civil accountability that endured, no professional penalties, nothing. He advanced from concealing misconduct to serving in Congress to heading the Judiciary panel. She transitions to point at Donalds, observing he participated in bank misrepresentation, accepted a negotiated resolution to avoid trial on felony accusations, and encountered no obstacle to serving in Congress, no blockage to his political professional path, and no responsibility for deceiving a financial entity. Both of these individuals assisted Donald Trump in attempting to reverse the 2020 election results, advocated misrepresentations regarding election fraud, supported the endeavor to reject millions of votes, declined to cooperate with the January 6th examination, and neither has encountered any meaningful ramifications for participating in an endeavor to terminate American democracy. The blend is influential because it demonstrates a pattern rather than an isolated occurrence, a system rather than individual shortcoming. It demonstrates that what faces disruption is not the Department of Justice holding individuals responsible, but rather the political framework that shields Republicans from responsibility while they critique any individual who attempts to enforce it. She informs the panel leader, "Here is the actual weaponization, influential men protecting one another while critiquing any individual who insists on responsibility. That constitutes the weaponization, the corruption, desaisia, and the predicament with ethics in the political framework." Her vocal delivery intensifies slightly, becoming further forceful as she highlights, Jim Jordan can conceal misconduct and head judiciary. Byron Donalds can commit misrepresentation and sit on oversight. And Donald Trump can misappropriate sensitive records and seek presidency, but if the Department of Justice attempts to actually prosecute offenses and enforce statutes equally regardless of influence and position, Republicans term it weaponization. The weaponization resides not at DOJ. The weaponization resides right here in this chamber, in the manner influential Republicans critique, trivialize, and deride any individual who attempts to hold them responsible. It constitutes the manner they have established a framework where statutes pertain to every individual save them and their partners. She gazes directly at Jordan, subsequently at Donalds, subsequently at the Republican panel members who have been sitting silently during this entire demolition, comprehending that critiquing her now would merely worsen circumstances. She informs them if they desire to talk concerning ethics, let's talk concerning their ethics. If they desire to talk concerning responsibility, let's talk concerning their responsibility. If they desire to examine the Department of Justice, let's examine why they have never faced investigation or held responsible, and why they believe they can sit in judgment of others when their own histories demonstrate they are the individuals who ought to be answering inquiries. The final stage of Crockett's systematic neutralization appears in the shape of direct inquiries intended not to produce good responses because no good responses exist, but to make the lack of responses itself become the narrative and generate moments of hush that resonate louder than any reply could. She asserts she possesses straightforward inquiries for both of them, constructing it to make unambiguous these are not complex policy disputes or subtle judgment calls, but basic factual inquiries concerning documented conduct. She gazes at Jim Jordan initially and interrogates, Inquiry 1. Did athletes under his oversight at Ohio State University notify him concerning Dr. Richard Strauss participating in sexually inappropriate conduct, yes or no? The hush that ensues is remarkable in its unease, as Jim Jordan clearly determines whether any response assists him or whether declining to respond constitutes the least harmful option. Eventually, he resolves on shifting focus, stating that as he has asserted voluminous times, he never witnessed any misconduct and the assertions face investigation. Crockett interjects cleanly, stating she did not inquire what he witnessed, but inquired if athletes notified him regarding misconduct, yes or no. There constitutes further hush and determination, eventually leading to a non-answer that signifies declining to directly address the inquiry. Crockett permits that decline to linger there for every individual to observe before progressing, and requesting the official records indicate. Mr. Jordan declined to deliver a straightforward response. She references her notes for Inquiry 2. In 17 years serving in Congress, how many legislative proposals has he successfully advanced into law as lead sponsor? Jordan attempts to talk regarding his important work battling regulations and opposing progressive policies, attempting to construct his utter lack of legislative achievement as actually representing principled resistance. But Crockett slices through that immediately, stating the figure is 0. Mr. Jordan has enacted 0 legislation and achieved nothing concrete in 17 years apart from obstruction and theatricality. She does not wait for him to reply before posing Inquiry 3. When the January 6th panel issued him a lawful legal summons to testify concerning his communications with Donald Trump during the incursion at the Capitol, why did he decline to cooperate while now insisting everyone else cooperate with his legal summonses? There possesses no reply apart from further shifting focus about it representing a partisan, fantastical theory which merely establishes Crockett's point concerning him insisting on responsibility from others while declining to deliver it himself. She focuses on Byron Donalds and the prosecutorial energy alters slightly because with him it constitutes further concerning personal hypocrisy than institutional betrayal. She interrogates Inquiry 1. Did he participate in a conspiracy to perpetrated bank misrepresentation in the year 2000, yes or no? Donalds attempts the identical defensive posture Jordan utilized, stating he accepted a negotiated resolution to lesser accusations 20 years ago. But Crockett compels the direct concession by interrogating yes or no, did he deceive a bank? The pause extends uncomfortably before he finally concedes yes, he accepted responsibility for his actions, which is as close to a direct concession as she purposes to obtain. Inquiry 2, does he still hold Black Americans were better off during Jim Crow segregation than they are currently? This constitutes the critical blow and every individual comprehends it. Donalds faces confinement between his preceding declarations and the political impossibility of upholding them now, between conceding he was erroneous and maintaining the character that never expresses regret for anything. What emerges constitutes confused retraction concerning facing misunderstanding and establishing points concerning family structure that merely renders everything worse. Crockett states he asserted it on voluminous occasions, defended the comments when critiqued, and intensified his position rather than expressing regret for them. Consequently, this constituted not a misunderstanding but a political stance that Black families were somehow more unified when they faced systematic oppression and terrorization. She is not genuinely anticipating a reply anymore, merely establishing the point that he cannot uphold what he asserted but also cannot bring himself to disavow it. She interrogates if he maintains those comments, yes or no. Hush is his sole reply, an incriminatory hush that makes unambiguous he understands he cannot uphold the stance but also will not repudiate it. Inquiry 3, he voted against catastrophe assistance for his own constituents subsequent to Hurricane Ian, subsequently accepted credit for federal assistance he opposed. She interrogates if he holds Florida voters comprehend he is accepting credit for assistance he attempted to reject them. There possesses no authentic reply, merely talking points concerning fiscal responsibility that resonate hollow when he is simultaneously voting for tax reductions for billionaires and increased military expenditures. Yet somehow catastrophe assistance for his own region is too costly. The concluding confrontation unifies everything as Crockett stands currently, collecting both binders and gazing at Jordan and Donalds with something that constitutes not anger precisely, but something frigid, like contempt blended with resolve. She says they both confronted her this morning because she constitutes a straightforward target, a person of color, a Democrat, an individual they think they can dismiss, deride, and silence with no ramification, an individual intended to merely accept facing disrespect and move on because that constitutes how influence maintains itself. But she informs the individual she is not straightforward. She constitutes not an individual who merely accepts dismissal. She constitutes prepared, educated, and exceptional legal practitioner, and she holds proof. She elevates both binders and informs them if they desire to conceal misconduct, she holds testimony from 177 victims. If they desire to perpetrate misrepresentation, she holds their court records. If they desire to present racist declarations, she holds video. If they desire to vote against their constituents, she holds their voting history. If they desire to instruct concerning ethics while possessing none themselves, she holds documentation of every hypocritical action they have ever perpetrated. They thought they could deride her and she would merely accept it, get emotional, defensive, or quit, thinking they could silence her the manner they have silenced other women in proceedings. She pauses to let that resonate before informing them they were erroneous. This constitutes what authentic responsibility looks like, not their partisan spectacle, Fox News segments, or fantastical theories concerning weaponized justice. Desire to dismiss them. She informs the desire to dismiss them. She informs the individuals if they ever interrupt her subsequent time, deride her subsequent time, or attempt to dismiss her subsequent time. She holds further proof, tapping the binders, further documentation, and further evidence of their shortcomings, hypocrisies, and controversies. Because unlike them, she conducts her homework, arrives prepared, and actually concerns herself concerning ethics, responsibility, and veracity. The concluding phrases resembles a closing argument as she interrogates if any alternative individual desires to question her vocal delivery or readying because she holds further binders. The hush that follows is absolute, with Jim Jordan and Byron Donalds sitting there completely neutralized, their meticulously developed personas neutralized, and their political futures suddenly precarious. All because they perpetrated the critical mistake of thinking they could deride a prepared woman with no ramifications. The segments become popular online before the proceeding concludes, accumulating 30 million views in 2 hours. The moment she asserts, "I hold proof on both of you," becomes instantaneous iconography alongside her reciting Ohio State testimony and exposing Donalds' conviction. Identifiers like #SheBroughtProof and #Ohio State Justice trend position #1 globally. Conservative media attempts upholding them but struggles because everything Crockett asserted faced documentation and verification, delivering them nothing save critiquing her delivery. While Jordan and Donalds issue defensive declarations that carefully circumvent addressing specific evidence, rendering them appear culpabler than silence would have. Within 72 hours, Ohio State survivors convene a press conference declaring fresh litigation naming Jordan personally. Florida media examine how Donalds acquired financial permits with a misrepresentation conviction, generating regulatory examination, and House Ethics receives formal complaints concerning both individuals that cannot face easy dismissal as partisan when the evidence constitutes this unambiguous. Further significantly, Republican donors commence making confidential communications to leadership stating Jordan and Donalds have become liabilities the party cannot sustain approaching midterms, observing that suburban female voters are watching how they handle men who concealed misconduct and perpetrated misrepresentation. 3 weeks subsequent to the proceedings, Speaker Johnson summons Jordan into his office with vote tallies, donor pledges, and polling demonstrating his leadership damages Republican prospects in swing regions. The final offer faces diplomatic phrasing, but the underlying message is clear: resign willingly or confront a conference vote that will disgrace him by removing him against his inclination. Jordan struggles initially, but eventually declares he is relinquishing the judiciary leadership to concentrate on alternative priorities, deceiving nobody but delivering the graceful exit everyone requires. Republican leadership eliminates Donalds from oversight through routine panel rotation, which also deceives nobody but delivers coverage for what constitutes actually occurring, which involves that having a convicted fraudster examine Biden corruption generates 2 voluminous critique angles. The Ohio State litigation proceeds with Jordan as defendant, with discovery compelling depositions where he expends 8 hours facing questioning concerning what athletes notified him. His lawyers eventually determined proceeding to trial would be disastrous. The financial resolution involves $5 million to survivors, expended in monthly segments of $83,000 for 5 years. And while it includes no concession of misdeed, every individual comprehends the significance when you expend $5 million to make litigation vanish. The SEC examination of Donalds widens from preliminary to formal as regulators discover disclosure infractions on his permitting applications, ultimately resulting in $500,000 in penalties plus a Florida legal organization review that suspends his legal permit for 5 years. Primary competitors materialize for both, well-resourced opponents supported by donors who have desertion them subsequent to the controversies. Trump facilitates Donald's competitor with rally addresses concerning requiring individuals with untarnished histories and no complications, effectively terminating any hope of political endurance. Jordan experiences defeat in his primary by 12 points after 17 years, declaring retirement to spend time with family subsequent to his wife Pauley initiating divorce. Incapable of managing the daily reporting of abuse concealment, Donalds experiences defeat in his primary by 31 points subsequent to Trump's endorsement preceding alternative direction, his entire political worth having involved faithfulness to Trump that no longer exists. A year subsequent, Jim Jordan at 60 resides in a Columbus leased apartment, writing monthly financial drafts to Ohio State survivors. His phone inactive because political influence dissipates the instant you lose position. His marriage is terminated and his adult offspring face estrangement subsequent to one son publicly conveying embarrassment regarding his father's actions. Byron Donalds at 45 observes electoral reporting of his decisive primary defeat in a more modest dwelling sold to expend SEC penalties. His professional path terminated when he thought he constituted just beginning, understanding exactly which instant neutralized everything. Recalling with perfect lucidity deriding Crockett and subsequent watching her uncover binders that exposed what he had been concealing, Jasmine Crockett participates in her 60 Minutes interview concerning her chart-topping book, Bring Proof, her workspace now displaying those framed binders and popular online screenshots, with students visiting invariably to study her preparation techniques. Her message constitutes invariably the same: document everything, ready for attacks before they arrive, and comprehend that influential individuals depend on you not being ready. So comprehensive readying represents the preferable reaction. She says, never permit any individual to make you hold like demanding responsibility is improper when responsibility represents exactly what is intended to occur. She informs the interviewer that Jim Jordan shielded concerning the sexual misconduct of 177 young males and encountered zero ramifications for decades until some individual finally rendered it impossible to circumvent responsibility. Byron Donalds constructed a professional path instructing concerning law and order while concealing his misrepresentation conviction until some individual exposed the hypocrisy. What occurred to them constitutes not concerning her achieving retaliation. It constitutes concerning influential individuals having to answer for their actions when some individual represents willing to prepare, document, and decline to let controversies stay ignored. They thought they could deride her and move on because that represents what invariably functions when influential men dismiss women they do not respect, but they were erroneous. Now Jordan is paying survivors and lost his professional path, and Donalds lost his place and his reputation, both discovering that readying overcomes influence and documentation overcomes dismissal, sometimes bringing proof represents sufficient to generate actual responsibility. The split screen displays 3 locations: Jordan writing subsequent check to survivors in his modest apartment with an inactive phone and news reporting mentioning him merely as a warning example; Donalds in his more modest dwelling observing electoral reporting where his successor examines law and order without the hypocrisy; and Crockett in her workspace with those binders visible behind her facing inquiry regarding how it feels to have terminated 2 professional paths with documentation. It feels like responsibility, she says, which represents what constitutes intended to occur but rarely does because influential individuals protect one another. Jordan shielded concerning misconduct. Donalds perpetrated misrepresentation. And both thought they were invulnerable until some individual finally ready proof they could not refute. The instruction constitutes not concerning retaliation. It's that influence doesn't shield you perpetually when some individual holds documentation you cannot dismiss. That constitutes what democracy requires. Individuals willing to carry out the work of holding influence responsible, even when it constitutes difficult. Final text surfaces. Jim Jordan lost leadership, paid $5 million to misconduct survivors, divorced, defeated primary after 17 years, career terminated at 60. Byron Donalds eliminated from oversight, paid $800,000 in penalties, defeated primary by 31 points, career terminated at 45. Jasmine Crockett, chart-topping author, national responsibility advocate, the woman who brought proof. The instruction constitutes to never deride a prepared woman as she might just terminate your career. Sometimes bringing proof represents sufficient. Sometimes responsibility requires decades. Sometimes it requires some individual willing to carry out the work of documentation. Sometimes it requires 45 minutes in a congressional proceeding with proof that cannot face refutation. Sometimes bringing proof represents sufficient. Sometimes veracity prevails when some individual declines to let influential individuals hide. The binders were red and blue. The proof was extensive. The ramifications were genuine. And two men who thought they were invulnerable studied the hardest instruction of their lives. Influence doesn't shield you perpetually when some individual holds documentation you cannot dismiss.